This is Dr. Jeff Craig. I'm the superintendent for the West Aurora Schools, and today is our inaugural broadcast or podcast where we're interviewing various members from throughout our organization. The purpose and the intent of these podcasts is to be able to, through a story and through a conversation, to try and better understand the different dynamics, the backgrounds that brought people into their current roles, different things that motivate them, some of the successes they've experienced, and some of the challenges they've experienced. It evidences and highlights some of those individuals, but also it gives us an insight as to some of the successes that they're experiencing in their workplace, whether it's a school or whether it's a facility. And it's a great way to be able to talk about the phenomenal and amazing things that happen throughout our district and with our students. So today's first podcast, we've chosen Mr. Ron Murphy, who is the assistant principal for operations at West High. And so just want to extend that greetings and welcome and thanks for being a part of this.
No, I'm happy to be the guinea pig here.
Well, you are kind of a guinea pig
now,
because we're checking all of our systems, and this is a new format for us. And so we're really excited. It's a whole new venture for myself. I've never done a podcast interview, but certainly have listened to quite a few. And, some of those are very informative, and we hope this is informative for people other than just a few of us here in the room today.
I'll do my best to make sure that my part is such.
A lot of pressure on you.
That's right. That's right.
So I've given you a little heads up, Ron, about some of the things that kind of are interesting, and I've known you in a variety of roles in our past, and so gives me a little more insight than normal. But just, people don't know this about you, and this is kind of a really cool and neat thing about it. You've had a really varied background, both inside and outside of education. You've been in the hotel business. You've been with Chicago Bulls Training Academy for about 10 years. You were a social studies teacher. You were an assistant athletic director, and you were an athletic director, now assistant principal at a very large high school in the state of Illinois. So let's talk about your educational experiences first, if we could. How did these opportunities help you get to your current role?
So specific to my educational experiences, all of that was kind of an education in itself. And I think that's what's so unique about the experience that I've been so fortunate to have is that at every stop, I definitely pulled something or drew something as I move forward. You mentioned the hotel gig, and that was, that is a business that is unlike any other. But working for the Four Seasons is a unique experience even within that business, I think. So the Four Seasons is one of the top tier hotel chains in the United States and globally. And they kind of have their own really focused approach to what an experience for a guest there should be. And what I think is unique about them is that extends from everybody from a page, which is what I started as, to a bellman, to people who are in managerial positions and even the upper echelon of administration. They kind of have the same set of expectations for those folks. And I thought that was unique, and it was actually something I learned a lot about myself and how to deal with people.
So those are your non-educational experience. And that was something that, and I probably should have blended the question because you can't talk about one without the other. And I think that's probably one of the nuances that there are people that have followed that traditional path of, I started off, I went to college, I got my degree, I did my student teaching and all this other stuff. So let's probe down a little deeper. Let's backtrack then. Let's go back to that hotel business and that Chicago Bulls Training Academy, because I think the point that I want to make and emphasize is your people skills, how it is a service-oriented business.
Sure.
Not unlike we are in administration.
Absolutely.
We are in the people business.
That's right.
So that's something that is very evident. To learn who you are at face value within the first few moments, you realize Ron Murphy is there to help you get what you need to be successful. Sure. So talk about why those other experiences have lent that to you.
Sure. I think, they go hand in hand. They really do. I think the people piece is a salient theme. I think for anybody who's good at what they do, minus a small portion of people who work on their own, you have to have the ability to relate to people and find ways to relate to people. And I think, as a leader, it's important to develop and maintain relationships at every step. And I think that's one of the things that certainly that hotel experience forced me to do. It forced me out of my shell, forced me to interact with people that I might not otherwise interact with.
What a great skill. I mean, too bad that isn't part of our service prep for our teachers and our administrators to talk about the service. Or I mean, we're public servants.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose sight of that, and we need some gentle and maybe not so gentle reminders.
Yeah, one of the things that was unique about the Four Seasons, they have this really robust training that you go through. And it doesn't matter, as I said, if you're a page, which is like an entry-level position, or an executive, you go through the same training.
Wow.
And one of the things that they really focus on is keep the guest first. And so I think that's important, and I think that's helped me at every level. The consumer of the service might have changed, but at the end of the day, the focus on keeping them first, be it a kid in your classroom, a teacher in your building, or, a guest at your hotel, it's the same concept.
Almost the Disney model.
It is absolutely the Disney model, right? You want to make sure that everybody has that positive experience, and that's part of it. So keeping that guest first is something that definitely stuck with me.
Sure. So now let's redirect a little bit. Let's go to the educational side. Talk to people about the path that you took and some of those influences that, that people are, well, why did you choose to do this? Why did you move into this role?
Sure. So I absolutely did my student teaching at Oswego East High School. I graduated from Northern Illinois, and I actually got my teaching certification through National Lewis, only because I could move through the educational cohort faster as a master's program than I could coming from a non-traditional or the private sector. Going that route. And I had a great experience student teaching at Oswego East. I had two really good sponsoring teachers who were very different in their approach and kind of how they facilitated learning in their classroom. But I would say, again, the thing that both did really well was relate to kids. I felt like what I picked up from them was how important it was to develop a rapport with your kids and get to know your kids. That was unique in itself. And Oswego East, for those who don't know, at that point when I was involved, was a new building. It was brand new. We had just opened.
And pretty diverse even.
And extremely diverse. And we were really working to define ourselves as a school community. So it was an exciting time to be part of that. And I think that lent itself to some other opportunities for me. Because we were new, because it was a growing district at that time, I ended up having other opportunities like the assistant athletic director's job that you referenced.
Give you some leadership experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an opportunity to keep a foot in the classroom and then gain some leadership experience. And that provided me with a different purview of kind of the educational system. And it's funny, when you take that, helicopter look or step back from things, how it changes your view. And it certainly did. Yeah,
it's, when you take that next role forward, I think people have the delusions or at least the visions of grandeur. There's more responsibility, a little more, you have a title, but with that comes a lot of responsibility. And with that comes the inherent responsibilities and that load that you have to bear in terms of dealing with challenges, whether it's challenging people, challenging situations, inside and outside influences, and pieces that you just can't control that you have to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of it is trying to manage maybe not a new set of people, maybe a new set of problems or a different set of problems. And you really, you have to be willing to step outside your comfort zone to do that. And that was a challenge for me on the front end, in part because it does change your relationship with people to some degree when your role changes.
Yeah, I always tell the story when I got my first dean's job. I was a coach and a teacher, and up until I was appointed as the dean of students, I was one of the guys.
Yeah.
The very next day, when they knew that I was now in the ranks of administration, I became one of those guys, and the conversation dramatically changed. And you have to be willing to accept that because you're never going to go back again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that helped me in the transition was there was this book, The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins.
Yeah.
It's a good read. And I think if you're transitioning into what you would consider a leadership role, well worth your while. But one of the things is he talks about is adaptability and having to understand that if you're coming from within an organization, your relationships are going to change and you have to be willing to adapt to that. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, that the dynamic's going to change a little bit.
Absolutely. And don't take it personally.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, So you talked about your assistant athletic director, where you were a part-time release to be able to fulfill that role, and you
Yep.
still had some responsibilities in the classroom. But then you aspired to an athletic director position at a prominent school,
Yep.
York High School. Talk to us about that experience and how those other pieces or either lent themselves or didn't lend themselves to that opportunity.
Yeah, so that was a unique opportunity to step into a place that was a little bit different than the other places that I'd been, and obviously, we're at Oswego East. We were trying to kind of establish our own traditions, and our own routines, our identity, if you will. York was unique because they had a very specific identity as
Huge
a school, athletic program, and a unique set of traditions all in themselves. Their cross-country program, when I got there, had won 28 state championships.
Yeah, pretty impressive.
Which is more than anybody else in the history of the state. They had a legendary coach in Joe Newton, who was in his early 80s and still coaching and still, very much a part of what was going on in the school.
And here you are in your first AD gig, and
this young guy.
He's going to respond to you.
That's right. And I think what I knew going in was it was really important for me to listen on the front end. I was aware that it wouldn't make a lot of sense to go in there and try and turn things on their side immediately. And that was never my intent. I wanted to provide leadership, but I wanted to provide thoughtful leadership.
Back to your guest services experiences.
Yeah.
That's where you hear, the customer's right and try to understand who they are and where they're coming from and how can we help you.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I think that's one distinction when we talk about talking and listening to people, not just to respond, but listening to people so that you hear them and you can take into consideration their point of view.
You bet.
And I think that's really important. And if I were going to tell somebody stepping into a leadership role, that make sure you do a lot of listening on the front end so you understand exactly what you're stepping into. Because you may have a preconceived notion about what it looks like from the outside or superficially, but when you start to dig in and pull back some of the layers of what's going on, you're going to have a much different perspective than maybe what you did on the front end.
You bet. Yeah. So we were fortunate enough for you to meander back towards, your home area back here in West Aurora 4 years ago.
Yep.
And so present day, assistant principal for operations, which, okay, so it's operations. Give folks a sense of what you're responsible for, some of your big items and some of your big challenges that you deal with.
Sure. Obviously, the building itself, I work with Jeff Schiller, our director of operations, Angie Smith, our assistant superintendent for finance and operations, to maintain the building and an excellent custodial and maintenance staff.
You bet.
So that is part of my gig, if you will. I also work with our counseling staff, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Martino, in forming the master schedule, which is a large undertaking that I've been very fortunate to have really good people around me to try and help me navigate.
And if somebody out there that has never put eyes on or hands on a master schedule at a high school, they would be in for a treat.
Yeah.
Of the foibles and agonies of gathering all the course requests for 3,700 students.
Yep.
And then making it work in an 8-period day so that they get as much as what they need as possible for graduation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the challenge is what makes us so unique as a school, because when people say we're a large comprehensive high school, we're a comprehensive high school. Our AP offerings are second to none.
Absolutely.
The different opportunities that kids have through elective coursework is remarkable. But it does create a lot of pieces in the master schedule, and it can be a challenge. But fortunately, we've got a staff that's really flexible and willing to do different things to provide our kids with those experiences. And I think we've got an administration and a school board who are willing to support programming that affords those kids those
So let's put some metrics to that. I mean, there's over 60 extracurricular opportunities for kids in terms of activities and clubs. There's 24 varsity sports.
Yep.
I don't know how many, the plethora of dual credit opportunities. I think we had almost 1,400 dual credit units that were offered last year, and probably at least half again as big for this coming school year.
Yeah.
So some of your description, talk about some of your highlights. What are some things that you would put your finger on? This is something I'm a couple of things I'm really proud of.
Well, I think, first and foremost would be the opportunities that we're providing our kids. We talk about equity and opportunity in the district, and I think we're living that at the high school and what we provide our kids. I think that, we've had folks in our building who have worked really hard and have been supported in fostering a wide range of opportunities in the programming that we have. I think that another thing that we've done really well, and when I say we, I not me, but our team at the high school, and that's Dr. Hiscock leading the charge, is push kids into more rigorous coursework.
Sure.
That's been something that he and Mrs. Martino, our assistant principal for teaching and learning, have been very focused on, and something that I think we've done successfully. When we talk about kids who are college and career ready, we want them to have a rigorous set of courses that have challenged them and, in the end, prepared them to step out our door and be a contributing member of society, whether they're going to a college campus or they're going to the workplace. And I think we're going to continue to expand that here soon.
Yes, we will.
With some additional programming coming through our Pathways to Prosperity programs.
Absolutely. Appreciate you highlighting that. So conversely, talk about some of those challenges.
Well, the funny thing is, coming into this job, my experience had predominantly been in athletics.
Sure.
When we talk about it as an administrator. And so I had a lot of questions about scheduling. I can schedule a 32-team basketball tournament in about 4 minutes. That wasn't hard. When it was, hey, put the master schedule together, that's a different animal. And I was very fortunate. Liz Wendell, who's still with us as director of assessment, was in my position prior to me stepping into it. And she was so good to me in the transition and trying to help me through and understand not only the master schedule, but the function of the building. So I was lucky to have that support, but there were certainly some challenges. And some of those challenges produced really exciting change. And I would point to some of the enhancements we've made to the learning environment. It goes back to $84.2 million referendum having been passed, and that created a number of opportunities for us, specifically at the high school.
And that without those resources that our very supportive community voted for, we don't have some of those choices to make. So
yeah, no. And when people ask me about West Aurora, the first thing I always talk about is it's a community that really is invested in our high school and our schools in general.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes us unique. But yeah, that afforded us the opportunity to install geothermal, as you know. And that was a daunting project for a guy who didn't know much about operations on the front end, but fortunately,
baptism by fire on that one.
Yeah,
right?
It was. I learned a lot. And I learned it fast.
So you got a nice, very, very appropriate Veterans Memorial Fieldhouse.
Beautiful.
We have some new locker room facilities that brought us up into current day requirements and expectations, and I think our building more effectively and accurately reflects the needs and expectations of our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you've done a masterful job of meandering through that and navigating the process with architects and general contractors and all those pieces that come into play and communicating to staff and the community. And I think that's something that those are the pieces you don't ever really know the insights of what it takes of how do I articulate, how do I share, when do I share, when do I advocate, when do I step back a little bit and let process. I mean, all those pieces that, there is no rule book that you follow.
No, you're absolutely right. And fortunately, our staff was very understanding. I think they understood what the end game was, and they were willing to suffer through some discomfort,
a little inconvenience
to get there. And I would say, and I think it's important to mention with that project, we were very lucky to have great partners in that project. Obviously, Studio GC, our architect, was great in answering a million questions that I had. That they probably had not answered before. Henry Brothers, our general contractor, was outstanding. We had a superintendent on the job, Greg Edders, who was just top notch.
Because some of those pieces, if they're not willing to work with you, it can be miserable.
No, they were very understanding, and I think,
and the end product isn't near as high quality.
Right? No, absolutely. If they're not willing to collaborate, and then obviously Pat Dacey, was incredibly valuable for me in that process and kind of educating me about, how things would happen, sequence, scope, those type of things.
His knowledge and background played an integral role for that. Absolutely, for sure.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to take a half a step back. You talked about many of your roles. You were a student athlete. You were an assistant coach. You were a coach, and then you managed coaches. So a lot of background in athletics. So I guess my question is, talk to me a little bit about those athletic experiences in those different areas and arenas, and how they helped form who you are and help you think the way you think and be able to carry out your mission.
Yeah, I think, for me, my experience in athletics was such that I continued in it. And I think that speaks to the experience that I had. My coaches at an early level were outstanding people who had very high expectations. And so I think I drew from that. But I think the thing when I talk to people about athletics, and it's obviously something I'm passionate about because I'm still involved now, I think the most valuable part of athletics for any kid is participation. It's not playing, it's not playing time, it's not winning, it's participation. I think it forces kids to interact with their peers and adults and to push themselves to get outside their comfort zone. We hear a lot about soft skills from employers today. I know that's feedback you've gotten as we start to partner, as we move towards our career center and the programming that'll go into the career center here sooner than later. And I think, we heard loud and clear from you and from them that soft skills was something that a lot of kids lacked. And I think one of the things athletics does is it really does force you to develop some of those soft skills, dealing with people, taking, and being accountable. Those things are all part and parcel of athletics. And I think the other thing that people don't realize that is so important in athletics is failure.
Yeah.
It's something that
the fear of.
Yeah. I think that it's important that every kid, and it was important for me, experience some level of failure. And I think that and learning how to cope with that, and getting back up after you get knocked down is something that we sometimes forget has really great value.
I want to go back a little bit. You talk about the soft skills, and I know exactly what and everyone out there understands what those soft skills are. But I was listening to a podcast the other day that Brian Kite, and he and his dad have a fun podcast. Yeah. And they talk about soft skills, and they kind of, it's a twist on the semantics of it. But the soft skills, if they're soft skills, why are they so hard to master? Are they really soft skills, or are those hard skills? Are those skills that we really want to emphasize? Because when you say soft, does that mean they're like second or third tier as far as, importance or priority? Or are these soft skills that we really want, how do I look somebody in the eye? How do I greet somebody? How do I smile? How do I respond? How do I deal with adversity? How do I deal with challenge? How do I deal with failure? And it's about grit. It's about perseverance. It's not about what's in it for me, is how can I help be better today? And some of those pieces that some of our student athletes, they get. And I think failure drives people in some cases, but I think some of our parents sometimes are afraid to let kids fail. But that helps you grow. I mean, that athletic Brown you're just referring to, that failure helped build you and make you stronger. Back to the old adage, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. So those are some resonating pieces that, I too have an athletic background, and I guess we both probably feel like there's no challenge too big. Bring it on, right?
Yep.
If you want to throw a curveball at me, let's go find a way to hit it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what's unique about that is it's hard to replicate those scenarios for kids.
Yes.
Right? It's hard to replicate that scenario, which requires them to use those soft skills in the classroom setting sometime.
True.
Right. But athletics uniquely offers them an opportunity to do that almost daily. And so I think that's part of why it's so important. And I absolutely agree. They're not soft skills. They're hard skills. And I think they're becoming harder and harder to teach kids because, screen time, that kids don't necessarily interact with one another in the form or fashion that they did 10 or 15 years ago, as we've seen technology take a larger and larger role in all of their lives.
Well, back to your emphasis on participation. I mean, you don't interact, with people and different, diverse backgrounds on screen time.
Right.
You get that on the court or on the field or in the restroom or wherever it is that you're interacting in the classroom. You get that real-time experience that I think cannot be replicated, as you say, and that's where we learn and grow and helps form our future self.
Yeah, and if I could just plug West Aurora High School in there one more time, it's one of those things that makes us really, really unique is the level of diversity and the people that you get to interact with walking the halls of West Aurora High School. And when we say diverse, I don't think people really understand how diverse we are.
Yeah.
We have 56 different languages or home languages.
We do.
Inside our building, or kids who are walking in the halls who have 56 different home languages. If you think about that, that's pretty remarkable.
And almost 20 different religions that families believe in and have faith in. So one size doesn't fit all in our building. I would agree.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that I think when we talk about well-rounded kids, you know, and the opportunities that West Aurora presents, it's not just programmatically, but it's the kids that you're walking the halls with and that you have to interact with on a day in, day out basis.
So to use maybe it's the athletic adage or that mindset, little shift here for you. Is there someone that you read or someone that you listen to that kind of is your go-to when you're trying to establish a mindset? Is there an author that says, you know, speaks to you? You know, some people go, well, I read so-and-so, or I read these types of books, or I listen to certain pieces. And I don't know, is there something that, or maybe even a broader question, what are some of those circumstances that motivate you? You know,
that's tough. Here's what I would say about the people that is my parents. You know, I still to this day, I'm 38 years old, but the people that I go to for that advice more often than not are still my parents at the end of the day. And I think I learned a ton from them about how to interact with people, you know, doing the right things. But, you know, in a sense, leadership too. You know, I think both my parents in very different ways really impressed upon me the need to serve in order to lead. And so that's something I always go back to. You know, my mom and the things she would do for our family just to make sure that we had what we needed to. And then my dad and what he did for our family, but also, you know, what he did for the people who worked for and with him too.
That sacrifice.
Yeah. And so those are people I always go to be very candid. As far as books that I've read, the name escapes me now. He's done a ton, 21. Maxwell. Yeah, thank you. I've read a number of his books, and I think here's what I love about it. It's concise. You know, it's not too much fluff, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think that it's applicable to anything and any situation for the most part. And I think, you know, it continually talk about the different things that good leaders do. And they look maybe differently depending on the situation, but if you drill down some of those fundamental pieces, believing in servant leadership, developing relationships, you know, leveraging relationships when needed, you know, those transfer from one to the other.
So I'm going to ask you to put your mentor hat on here at the wise age of 38 years old. But I think you can speak from a very contemporary perspective because it's fairly fresh in your transitions from the hotel business through the teaching ranks and then through the entry level administration positions. Now, not the penultimate, but certainly a very large role at a large high school. If you were to counsel young people, men, women, that are either considering or potentially considering aspiring through the ranks, what would be that counsel of things, experiences to take part in, things to think about, preparing themselves educationally? And then I'm going to ask you for the offside of that, and that's things to avoid. So what would be your counsel? I am at your humble service listening.
All right. So that's a great question. You know, the first thing I would tell them if they're interested in leadership is to jump in, because you don't necessarily need a title to lead. And I think that the opportunities that I was afforded were generally a product of me having jumped in to do something that there wasn't necessarily a title for. That I was willing and wanted to do. And as a result of that, gained some experience that I think when I did have the opportunity to step into a leadership role, helped set me aside from other people. So I think that would be the first one, is jump in, because there is no replacement for experience.
Yes.
And there's going to be, you know, various opportunities to get experience doing different things.
So you don't get it out of a book, right?
No, you don't. And I go back to my first coaching gig, like, I was coaching football at a very small high school and had the opportunity to be the freshman football coach. And part of being the freshman football coach was on Thursdays after practice, you lined the field.
What a great experience.
You got out there with the painter, you painted the field. I cut the grass. As an assistant AD, I got out and I worked our baseball field, and that was all really good experience. It's just stuff you jump into because, again, that helped me down the line. And I think so. I would say jump in is one piece of advice. I would say when you get that first job, that first kind of foray into a leadership position, you're probably getting hired for your capacity. Right? It's not because you have this wealth of experience. No, this is the first time you've gotten into a job like that.
That makes sense.
And so somebody believes in you.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that you have the ability to do the job. And so keep that in mind and ask questions. They didn't hire you because you knew all the answers. They hired you because they thought you could figure them out, I think. And I think that is probably the scenario when I stepped into the assistant athletic director's job at Oswego East. At the time,
I had a bird's eye view of that, and it was about somebody willing to do the work too.
Yeah,
I mean, there's the cognitive capacity, but I think physically, are they willing to just get the job done?
Yep.
It's sometimes not about title, or as you say, it's not about their compensation. It's not about some official role. Hey, we need to get this done, and can you help me get that completed?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was willing to do the work, I think.
Yes.
And you guys believe that I would figure it out eventually, even if I stubbed my toe a couple times. But I would say to people, you get in that job and you think you have to have all the answers. You don't. Ask the questions and be really honest about what you do or don't know, because I think that's the quickest way to get to where you want to be.
That's some great feedback. I think some of our folks, they do have fear of failing. I've never done this before. Well, that's where you get your experience.
Yep.
It's probably one of the most frustrating, pieces when you go through an interview process where you don't have the experience. How do I get it?
Right.
Unless I'm allowed to perform that.
Right.
So that's great experience. So what are some things that what are some pitfalls or what are some potholes that they should navigate around or try to avoid?
I think it kind of goes back to thinking you know it all. Again, you're stepping into a position not because you do know it all, but they think you'll be able to figure it out. And sometimes you lose sight of the people piece. That's one thing I would tell people is, you're going to have to develop and maintain relationships. And those relationships might look differently than others that you've had, but they're still going to be the most important piece in continuing and being successful in any position. Because even if you intend to make change, at the end of the day, you need people to make change.
Stay humble.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. And I think along those same lines, keep front and center who your consumers really are. Because I think one of the things that I had to think about as I transitioned into a job where I dealt less with kids and more with adults was, hey, at the end of the day, the end game, our end consumer isn't the adults.
Yeah.
It's the kids.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important because I think, as someone who's new to a gig like that, you might think, okay, well, this is a group of people that I've got to manage and keep happy and keep moving. And, 95% of the time, the people in this business want what's best for kids. It's really 99.9% of the time that our belief in what's best for kids or our interests really align. But there is going to come times when they don't necessarily align. And I think that's really the time it's important to keep front and center who your guest is, going back to the hotel business, or who your consumer is, and that's the kid.
Helps to keep in mind while we have our jobs every day.
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And I did find that was a challenge as I transitioned into a position where I had less access to kids and didn't see them every day, but it's important that you keep those kids front and center.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for sitting down with us today and being our first podcast guest. I think when you first asked me, why you picked me, aren't there more interesting people? Or actually, no, I thought your background was really interesting. And I think, fortunately I have the prerogative of knowing you through a variety of these steps. And so that probably made it even more interesting for me because I think it's very poignant for our community to hear about that. But our aspiring administrators that are saying, what if, could I, should I, what are some things I should be thinking about? And I think you're a great illustration of that. And we're very proud that you're a part of our organization. We certainly, everything you've talked about today is evidenced daily at West Aurora High School. And so we thank you for that. Thanks for sharing your comments and thoughts and a little bit of your life with us. Any parting comments before we finish our first podcast?
No, I appreciate the opportunity that I've been afforded here. I'm really lucky that I get to work at a high school with a great staff and Dr. Hiscock is, there's no one else I'd rather work for. He's top shelf.
Good stuff.
And we work with good people there
You
too.
bet.
Our team is top notch.
Well, thank you again. And as I said, this is our inaugural podcast. We will be developing a frequency. I'm not sure if it'll be every couple of weeks, 3 weeks. We don't know what it takes time to put this all together, but we look forward to our next guest and our next opportunity. And Ron Murphy, thank you for being our very first podcast interview.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet.